NFL Conference Championship preview. That's right. We're all the way at the Conference Championship this week, and we are having the potential for a Super Bowl rematch going over every single game for these teams. What led up to this point in this season? What is the story of the Commanders? How did Philadelphia bounce back from a Super Bowl hangover? How did the Bills figure out a way to reinvent themselves so now they can go toe to toe with the Chiefs again? Feels like it's been so long since they lost to them in the conference championships, and it feels like a decade ago we had that 13-second game, but here we are again, another playoff matchup of Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. How's it going to shake out? We're also going to go over just the overall NFL landscape as a whole because we have a lot of head coaches moving in and out, and we may give you a preview on way too early next year on who we think might be on the hot seat, but we're here. This is the battle of who's going to the big game. There's only, 3 games left in the NFL. I guess 3 and a quarter if you count the Pro Bowl weekend with Peyton and Eli
We don't
coaching.
count the
But
Pro Bowl.
yeah, I don't count the Pro Bowl. Flag football. Don't care
Mhm.
about it. No one cares about it. The worst, some would say, like all-star event of any sport, even though you're the best sport of any to watch. It's so bizarre how that happened.
Yeah, it's terrible. The Pro Bowl is a disgrace for the best sport in all of the land, and we're left with flag football. Just terrible. Just terrible. But nonetheless, we don't have to worry about the Pro Bowl because we have the conference championship games. We have legacies on the line. We get yet another Josh Allen versus Patrick Mahomes classic. The last two times they faced in the playoffs, we had the 13-second game you and I saw live together, one of the greatest games ever. And then this past year, they had the divisional round matchup where the Bills hoisted them in Buffalo. Massive game for them, and Tyler Bass misses a field goal to tie the game with a minute left. The Chiefs would prevail and win their second consecutive Super Bowl. Them against each other, if we include regular season and postseason, are 8-8 respectively, with Josh Allen being 4-1 in the regular season and 0-3 in the postseason. Somebody that he keeps running into, as everyone who runs into Patrick Mahomes ultimately does, falls within there. But we've had some classic matchups between these two guys, and right now Vegas is not entirely sure how this game will go. Chiefs are hosting, but right now the Chiefs are favored at just a point, over under a 48.5, and I think we're in for a classic. I don't think that's a hot take to say.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's a hot take to say either. And I don't know. I guess what do you think it is with this matchup? Because I feel like in the regular season, it's a completely different matchup than whenever we see them in the playoffs. And frankly, anytime they play each other in the regular season, it doesn't even seem like the Chiefs are interested. It almost seems like they're toying with them. Like, okay, yeah, sure. We're just going to hang it over your head that you beat us every time in the regular season. And then we beat you in the playoffs. It's like ridiculous because you had I'm pretty sure the first time that they beat the Bills was when Josh Allen was first finding his footing in the league. And then after that, you blow them out in the conference championship. You have the 13-second game, and then the Bills end up, you know, taking until this year to make it back to the conference championship since they've been blown out for the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's been a long time since they've been there. But what do you think it is, just like the matchup in the regular season, why the Bills are feels like so much more dominant, where it feels like in the playoffs the Chiefs have had control throughout most of the games? Oh no,
Is it going to be
Cox.
lagging on me? No way. No way. Um, I think with these games, every game that they have against each other always feels like a battle, and both these last two postseason games were iconic in these last 10-year span that we're talking about. I think that the fact that the Bills have been able to beat them in the regular season should give America faith that they can beat the Chiefs this upcoming weekend in the conference championship. Because it's not like, at least in this situation, like unlike with Lamar, who didn't play a great game in the conference championship game last year, and unlike for Joe Burrow, who couldn't make the playoffs these past 2 years, but Josh Allen, like every time he faces him, he balls out. It's not like he's had these massive crash outs against Patrick Mahomes, at least in recent memory. If you want to point to the first conference championship game, I'll give you flowers there. But they typically bring their best when they face each other, it feels like. And I do think that Josh Allen has not been the reason why the Bills have lost. 13 seconds to stop them going, what was it, 60 yards to a field goal. That's on the defense. And then Tyler Bass missing a 40-yard field goal. Conditions were pretty tough, but ultimately you got to make your kicks in the NFL. So I do think the Bills are definitely in their best position they've been to this point to beat the Chiefs. Um, with just the way their offense has been, with James Cook, the resurrection of him, with the way that they've utilized the receiving core. We talked about it last episode about how they moved away from Stephon Diggs and they did kind of took a page out of the Chiefs playbook with moving on from their star receiver and filling them with reliable receivers outside of just the Tyreek Hills and Stephon Diggs of the world. Get the Khalil Shakers of the world. We get the Dalton Kincaids, the Dalton Knox, and the Amari Coopers of the world. And it feels like their offense is a lot more reliable and extreme and much, much more efficient with a lot less turnovers.
Yeah, because it seems like they took away any reason for Josh Allen to press, if that makes sense. And a lot of those turnovers can be um, chalked up to, I feel like, just Gabe Davis to some degree. Not really that much. They just kind of got rid of him because some team was going to pay him too much money because the Jaguars are like, okay, to bolster our offense, what we need to do is overpay for mid-tier to below average receivers with a 50% catch radius. So we're going to do what we did with Christian Kirk, but worse with Gabe Davis. And it feels like he just doesn't have Gabe Davis or Stephon Diggs in his ear chirping for the ball. Chirping for the ball. And it's like when you go into like a busy office and then you just hear people talking around you all the time and then you just walk out outside in nature and then everything's calm, silent, cool, and then he can just kind of flow throughout the game. It's like it doesn't matter who I'm throwing the ball to. All that matters is that I'm making the right read in the situation where I'm not looking for Stephon Diggs and he would try and force the ball to Gabe Davis. Like it just you don't have as much of that feeling that Josh Allen is trying to force the game anymore. And he's done a great job of just letting the game come to him. And I feel like he understands like everyone is gonna say you're the most talented quarterback of all time. At least a lot of people do, because it's like he's like Ben Roethlisberger with Cam Newton's running ability. It's like one of the best quarterbacks you could draw up in a lab here, and then just that effortlessness there is like what makes him great. I feel like, but I feel like the reason why maybe the regular season is a little bit different. I feel like it could come down to just the matchup of Andy Reid and Sean McDermott, where Andy Reid is more just trying to poke and prod in the regular season, where in the playoffs he like unleashes his entire playbook versus them. Maybe he holds a little bit back. So defensively, that year it feels like the Chiefs' offense is always a little bit different. So he doesn't show his full hand in the regular season to Sean McDermott, where it feels like the Bills go gung ho in the regular season and always throw their best punch. Chiefs go back and just break down the film better.
Yeah, I think the coaching mismatch is ultimately why I think the Chiefs have been as successful in their postseason compared to the Bills. Do I think Sean McDermott's a bad coach? No. But if we're talking about Andy Reid and what they're able to do, and not just Andy Reid, also, let's give credit to Matt Nagy and Steve Spagnuolo because these guys are as sharp as they come. Whereas the Bills, like, I just feel like for them, every time they face each other, for the Bills, it's more about that's basically their Super Bowl at that point. They face off, they have that shit circled on their calendar. They've had heartbreaking losses to them numerous occasions. They've been so close that when the time comes in the postseason, they're more prone to mistakes. They're more prone to turnovers. They're more prone to just mental errors, or better yet, even with if we go back to last year's game with the Damar Hamlin fake fourth punt. Like, what was that? What are we doing here? That was an error on Sean McDermott. So, like, there's just different moments where the Chiefs are a lot more calm and collected, and the Bills just haven't been historically. This game is a game where they can potentially rewrite history if they want to.
Yeah, and also like speaking of spells in the NFL, maybe this these two teams are cursed to lose to each other every other time they play and win every other time they play, where if they played each other 10 times, the record now would be 5-5 with how these teams are currently constructed. And the Chiefs just figured out, oh, we'll lose the regular season game and win the playoff game. And if the Bills next year they lose this game, they face the Chiefs because they both won their division. Maybe try out losing to them in the regular season and then come back and beat them in the playoffs.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if the Chiefs beat the Bills this conference championship game. They will be the first team in NFL history to beat a team 4 consecutive times in the playoffs.
What? That's bad,
Yep,
man. Like, I know this is a good Bills team, but that's bad, man. Like, that's a bad
that's
stat to
bad juju.
own.
Yeah, especially with a guy who like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes outside of football are like best friends. They train together, they go out together, like they're always together. They're like the best buddies in the NFL. And so for him to have 4-0 in the playoffs against you, like that's something that I just don't think should be the case. Also, they got to think about their fallen heroes of the past year. Like they haven't made a Super Bowl since Orenthal James Simpson was a CBS analyst. And I do think that that's a real thing. If he had to be sacrificed to win a Super Bowl for the Bills, I think that's something that the Juice would have done for the Bills, and rightfully so. Unfortunately, he was lost back in 2024. However, if that's the sacrifice that he would do for his city of Buffalo, I think he would do it 10 times over. Thank you, Juice. I appreciate you here. So I do think that if we look at this game, like the legacy wise, what Josh Allen needs for his legacy is to say that he's beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, something that only Joe Burrow can say right now. If he can beat him and make the Super Bowl, at this point, now we can argue, like, okay, maybe we can put him above Joe Burrow. Maybe we can put him, if he wins the Super Bowl, above Lamar potentially. So
Mhm.
this is something where, if we're talking about who's the second best quarterback, Josh Allen has a real opportunity, especially if he outperforms Mahomes, makes the Super Bowl, and wins it. He's now the next guy with a ring, so he deserves his flowers. You can put him at number two confidently. Lamar has an argument there. He might be a three-time MVP, but I think you'd have to give him the respect there at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Because right now, as far as it goes, like as I'm concerned, is like a hierarchy for like best quarterbacks. If we're going off like rings, yards, and talent here, it's kind of been Stafford at number two over the past couple of years, and he's been underrated. Um, but yeah, just that Josh Allen and Mahomes being friends thing, Peyton Manning, just like, yeah, I found myself going on beer runs for Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen when I had them over my house. Like, it
Yeah,
is crazy that they're that close, and then every time in the playoffs, it just fails. And I feel like sometimes too, what happens with the Chiefs is that divisional round, everyone was revving up the Bills in that 13-second game. They're like, this is the team that's going to come back and beat the Chiefs. And then the Chiefs just take that back straight to the bulletin board. Like, do you hear this? We're the defending champs, and they're picking the Bills to beat us. And then um, last year, when they faced each other in the divisional round, everyone picked the Bills to beat the Chiefs, and the whole narrative was the Chiefs have never gone on the road. Can they do this? Can they go back to back? Even Brady hasn't gone back to back. And then this time around, it's like everyone's going to be like, well, they can't lose four times in a row, right? And it feels like the media has just created bulletin board material for the Chiefs, especially this season. Because if we're talking about how teams have like kind of got here to this situation, all the Chiefs did was not beat themselves the entire regular season, do just enough to have they did just enough to have the best record in the NFL. They didn't dominate, but they only went 15-1. I mean, my god, what else does this team have to do? It's like, oh yeah, you went 15-1, but it didn't look good. Like, excuse me, they're trying to be the first team to three-peat, and then you're over here talking about, well, it didn't look pretty. Like, they had the best record in the NFL. Okay, so you liked how the Ravens beat teams in the regular season better? Huh, how'd that work out? You liked how the Lions beat teams better in the regular season? Huh, how'd that work out? You liked how Minnesota was beating teams better? Oh, yeah, them and that high flying offense. You liked how the Bills were beating teams and they're in the conference championship. You like watching the Bengals and Joe Burrow. Like, okay, well, all the Chiefs did was do just enough to win. Like, they don't need to be going out here putting on a show week in and week out. That era is kind of over for them. And now what Patrick Mahomes is doing is trying to fill up these with rings, and he's trying to catch Tom Brady by being the first person to three-peat, and then if he can be the first person to beat a team 4 times in a row, he just knocks 2 major accomplishments and rises way up the GOAT ladder. Like, there's just levels to things people pay attention to, but, like, the Chiefs flew under the radar the entire season, and now everyone's like, "Oh, well, it's just the Chiefs and Arrowhead." Like, no, this is a big deal.
Yeah, it's a massive deal. You nailed what you said about the Chiefs as far as this regular season. They didn't win sexy, but they won games, and that's what's important. Also, for the Chiefs, like you want to think about how they got here, right? Because they have an opportunity in the next two games to not only win the breakup not once, not twice, but three times over with Tyreek Hill, who now wants to leave Miami, winning three straight Super Bowls after getting rid of arguably your best offensive weapon for Patrick Mahomes is absurd. Not only that, for a team going for the three-peat, if they just make the Super Bowl this year, they will be the only team to make three consecutive Super Bowls and win two consecutive Super Bowls in that time. Going for the three-peat, every other team, the only of the eight teams that have gone and won back-to-back Super Bowls, most of them didn't even make the playoffs. And then most of them, outside of the ones who didn't make the playoffs, lost in the first round. Then we have two teams that lost in the conference championship. So if they want to be just like history, they lose this weekend. There's nothing that can hurt the Chiefs at this point. Mahomes has three rings. I don't think there's anything that's going to blemish their resume by any means. They should, honestly, like, you can expect them to lose and it would be fine. But in this case, like, they win this game and they make the Super Bowl, and whether it's a rematch with the Eagles or they face Jaden Daniels and the Commanders, like, even just making the Super Bowl, winning potentially three straight Super Bowls, that's when we talk about the GOAT argument, where Brady obviously has seven, and he has the longevity that he has. He has all the numbers, but also within this last 8 years, you can say that okay, well, he would have made his sixth Super Bowl, I think, at this point, because he made it against the Bucks, and then he would make it for his fourth. So it'd be his fifth Super Bowl appearance. He made the AFC title game. He barely lost to Joe Burrow, and he barely lost to to Tom Brady his first year when he threw 50 touchdowns. Like, this has been the most dominant 8 year run in NFL history. And if he completes it with a three-peat, then at this point, like, this is the most dominant period of time in an 8 year window of any team in NFL history, simply put. And Patrick Mahomes, do I think he's the GOAT? No, but I think you could argue him as the GOAT once when he has four rings and he's won three straight Super Bowls. He can say something that Tom Brady never did. I think that's something you can give to him.
Yeah, and I'd be comfortable putting him in the conversation at 5. I really would be. I think that's appropriate, especially with the matchups in the regular season, but he would have something on his resume that Tom Brady has never done, and he just overall, like, he's as clutch as Tom Brady, but we all know he does so much more where he has the IQ, self-awareness, and just the mobility and throws that Tom Brady will never have here. So I think with the Chiefs, it is crazy the way you put that because the Chiefs are in a situation where there's no pressure on them, which is scary to think about. Because if you're Buffalo, Buffalo has all of the pressure on them coming into this game. I mean, people are going on shows literally comparing them to the Chiefs when the Chiefs dynasty isn't over. Like, it could still have very well have 5 to 10 years left as long as Patrick Mahomes is there and Andy Reid are there together. Like, that dynasty is going to go on for as long as it takes because Andy Reid, well, maybe he wants to overtake Belichick and be the greatest head coach of all time. Boom, mind blown. Goes to Philadelphia, gets to a Super Bowl with the team. In Philadelphia, and then he can go to the Chiefs and have a dynasty and do something that Belichick never did, which is have two successful NFL franchises as the head coach, which would be another interesting storyline because like people get caught up in Andy Reid, in Patrick Mahomes go argument, but they don't talk about the big guy in Andy Reid. Like, it's not as sexy to talk about who like the best NFL coaches are in NFL history because that may be the hardest sport to be a head coach of just because you have to coach the special teams guy, pick the defensive coordinator, pick the offensive coordinator, and then make sure a 53-man roster comes together, make all of those cuts. Like, this is a brutal job.
Yeah, it's brutal and it's unforgiving. I mean, you look at his history, right? Before he was a coach, he was a coordinator for Brett Favre, and he brought Brett Favre, winning him two consecutive MVPs. The best that we got out of Brett Favre in his career was when Andy Reid was his offensive coordinator. He then goes to Philadelphia, and he helps groom Donovan McNabb into what he became. Donovan McNabb was excellent at his time. He was a Pro Bowl quarterback. He moves on, and then they have Michael Vick, resurrects Michael Vick's career after he had his dog allegations and went to prison for a while. Brought him back. He had comeback player of the year. Then he goes. We mentioned how unforgiving the NFL is. They fire him despite making four consecutive NFC title games, Super Bowl appearances, losing to the Patriots. Gets fired, goes to the Chiefs, resurrects Alex Smith's career, brings him to a success, trades up for Patrick Mahomes, and the rest is history. But this is a guy that's been successful with multiple teams and several quarterbacks at this point. He's the quarterback whisperer, simply put, and he's um, been better in the newer NFL than what we saw with Belichick. We saw how Belichick's adapted, didn't get a head coaching interview in this round of coaching hires. Like, I think Andy Reid's going to be remembered more favorably than Belichick, simply partially as the media, but also partially because he might just be the better coach overall when it comes to offensive minded and just the way he gets along with his locker room.
Yeah, also he never went to Matt Nagy when he got fired from Chicago and he's like, "Hey, do you want to coach the defense?" He never did that. So I feel like
Yeah.
that's a notch over Belichick in his belt there. Like, "Hey, Matt, I know you're our offensive coordinator. Do you want to be the defensive coordinator next year?" Say for some reason Steve Spagnuolo's like, "You know what? I've been the defensive coordinator long enough. I want to go to Jacksonville because no one else is like, okay, Steve, have fun in Jacksonville." And then he's like, "Eric, long time since we talked. Eric Bieniemy, do you want to be our defensive coordinator? Better yet, how about you be our special teams coach?"
And better yet,
Never did
let's talk
that.
about the. Yeah, he never did that. And also, like, his coaching tree is so much better than Belichick's. It's not even close. Belichick's most successful head coach is Brian Flores, maybe. Who can we point to for Belichick that's like, oh, that was a successful, good tenured head coach? You don't have it. Gerard Mayo certainly didn't pan out, and neither did the Romeo Cornells of the world, the Eric Manginis of the world. The list goes on. Josh McDaniels has been a failed head coach. The list, Matt Patricia. Like I said, I could go on for hours with that. But meanwhile,
Yeah.
even just thinking about it off the top of my head, we have John Harbaugh, who comes from the Andy Reid tree. You have the Doug Petersons of the world who won a Super Bowl. And there's countless other examples that I could point to alone from Andy Reid. So Andy Reid has a better coaching tree, he's got a better quarterback tree, and has been successful elsewhere. You want to talk about the GOAT debate. If he wins another Super Bowl, then at that point you could put him comfortably in that GOAT conversation as well.
Yeah, and then just realizing how dumb Justin Fields is, you do have to give a lot of credit to Matt Nagy for the Bears situation looking back on it now.
Well, he also made Mitch Trubisky the MVP. Like, that's not an
Yeah.
easy task by any means. You made him the Nickelodeon's most valuable player. That's by
I'm
no
pretty sure he's a
means an
pro
easy
bowler
task.
too.
He was a Pro Bowler. You made Mitch Trubisky, who was one of the biggest draft busts of that draft, and you made him successfully an MVP. So congrats to you.
Yeah.
So
No, it's crazy. What do you think of the Bills though? Like if they if they don't win this one, do you think they ever will do it?
I'd like to think they will eventually, but it might be too little too late, honestly. I feel like this is the game. If I had to predict this game, I will pick the Bills to win this game. But I think if they lose this game, like, this is your year to beat it. Not only can you stop them from winning a three-peat, but also this is the time where the Chiefs, at some points this year, has not looked like the best offense. At some points, their defense has looked like not the best defense, and it feels like there was cracks in the armor at some points during the season. This was your year to, okay, they're not going to have a three-peat. We're going to have our time. We're going to win the Super Bowl. Josh Allen might get his MVP finally. This is his year to take what is his. And if he doesn't get that, and he crumbles again for the fourth consecutive time for him, that's going to be one of those things that forever will haunt the Bills at this point. The 13-second game haunts them bad enough, but if they don't pull it out in this week, then we look at Sean McDermott differently. We look at, is there changes in the front office? Like, things need to change if you guys fail for the fourth consecutive time.
Yeah, no, things definitely need to change. And my worry in this game is gonna be like that the Bills won't be able to find a nuance in this game. I think that's generally what's going to hurt them because if we're in a situation where maybe the run game isn't panning out as much and Josh Allen gets a little bit antsy, and then there starts to be a little bit of pull with him and Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator. Like, are they going to be able to find that perfect balance? Because so far, Josh Allen really hasn't had to do anything in the playoffs. Like the Ravens game, they pretty much got the turnovers and were able to run the ball, and he had a few QB sneaks, but feels like he just really hasn't had to do much in the playoffs where Mahomes put on some antics. Versus the Houston Texans. Got a real test versus that Houston Texans. And I happen to believe that has Houston Texans defense is better than this Buffalo Bills defense is. I think D'Amico Ryans, as far as a head coach, get the most out of that defense. And right now you have Daniil Hunter, Will Anderson, Derek Stingley Jr., one of the best young corners in the league and two of the best pass rushers in the league. And then you have a hard hitting player like Shakir on that team. I feel like that defense really warmed them up for the Buffalo Bills. And it was the first I feel like that was the best team they possibly could have played to prepare them for this Buffalo Bills team because we've seen it before with Matt Milano, and I feel like this Chiefs team is just better than what we've seen over the past few years. And last game was in Buffalo, but this time being in Arrowhead, it's one thing going to Arrowhead in the regular season, but now when you're on the road, it's just a much tougher environment to play in. And I do think that the Chiefs are going to win this game because, like, in my mind, there's no way at this point I can pick against Patrick Mahomes. Like he's just one of those players. It's like picking against Michael Jordan. It's like picking against Tom Brady. Like, sure, would I be shocked if I was wrong in this game? No. But at the same time, if I pick Patrick Mahomes every time, it's going to be like a 90% rate as far as when it comes to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you got to. That's good logic there. For me, I pick emotionally. I don't pick necessarily based on analysis in this case. And I feel like for me, I'm picking with okay. Well, Josh Allen. Do I see him as a guy that could lose 4 consecutive games against Mahomes? I do think that he's had a lot of bad breaks these last 2 times he played. I mean, for Christ's sakes, with these 3 games, these guys have combined for 16 touchdowns, 1,800 yards, 1 interception between the two. Like these guys have played historic playoff games when they faced off against each other. And I think part of it has been the Bills letting Josh Allen down. So in this game, like knowing what's on table for them, I do think Josh Allen will go out. He'll play a great game. Patrick Mahomes is not gonna give it to him for free by any means, but I think this is the time that the Bills finally pull it out with their offense. Their offense has been the most efficient offense in the league at this point, and I think that they can do it. And I think this is the time for Josh Allen. So I'll pick him to win. This is going to come down to the last person who has the ball ultimately. And if it's Josh Allen that has the ball last, then he's probably going to win. And if it's Patrick Mahomes, it's probably going to be Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and I see it kind of going like similarly to the past few games that they've had, where kind of for both of these teams, the first half has really just been a feel out half where maybe there's a big play at the end of the half, but like at halftime, I think this is probably going to be 10-10. Maybe we get an offensive explosion from both these quarterbacks, but I don't really see the score going higher than 30 for either team. So I feel like this game is going to be won. Um, they feel like it's going to be 26-24 Chiefs. Just another close, tough battle for both of these teams, but I feel like it's going to be a good one. And I feel like the Chiefs defense, like the Bills, that's going to be one of the toughest defenses that they have faced this year because like George Karlaftis and Chris Jones still being one of the best defenders in football, like that's going to be a tough challenge. Maybe the Chiefs secondary is a little bit weaker, and that's going to be where they'll be able to expose. But I feel like as far as stopping the run, Chiefs should be able to take care of business up front.
Yeah, I think they should be able to take care of business. I know when they faced in the regular season, the Bills were able to put on some points for them. That was midway through the season. Things have changed, obviously. It's still postseason. And we all said, like we said when we previewed every game to this point, postseason comes around, things do change. I think 27-24 is the score I'll go with. Um, and I'll pick the Bills to win it in this time around, but ultimately, who has the ball last is what's going to be the ultimate decider in this Bills and Chiefs matchup. And then on the other side of the ball, we have two very different teams, right? The Eagles and Commanders. On one side, we have the ultimate underdog. When entering the preseason, the Commanders were 151 odds to win it all, and they are just the third team to make it to the conference championship with those odds. Other teams that are included here are the 99 Rams, who made the Super Bowl, the Bengals, who made the Super Bowl as well, and then the Bucks from the 70s. So he has an opportunity to be the second rookie to make it to a Super Bowl. Jaden Daniels, that is. Last two teams, obviously, I mentioned the Rams and Bengals, underdog stories. The ultimate underdog against the Eagles, who have been probably the best front office the last 10 years with Howie Roseman, whether it's the A.J. Brown trade that we can point to, whether it's the Saquon Barkley free agency acquisition, or literally drafting the entire national title Georgia defense onto their team with the notable players there like Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, respectfully. So the ultimate number one seed slash best team in the league pretty much the entire season against the ultimate underdog with this rookie quarterback that we're seeing with our own eyes fruition into a star.
Yeah, and he's putting on one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history, if not the best here. And now we have we have Jaden Daniels. If he wins this game, would be able to break Ben Roethlisberger's rookie season record as far as for total wins here. And I feel like it is more impressive because he's doing it with a franchise that's kind of been a laughing stock. And with Ben Roethlisberger, he was with the Steelers and he kind of just was given the reins, said, "Don't mess it up, kid. Make some big plays with your arm," and he did that, won a game in the divisional round, and helped get them to a conference championship his rookie year. And then with Jaden Daniels, it's just a situation that seemed untenable when he came in there. Is a terrible organization. It always had been. They had a reign of terror with Dan Snyder that had finally come to an end. They had sewage leaking in that stadium. They still have one of the worst stadiums. It's one of the worst places to play, according to Devonte Adams. So it's like just a tough, unattainable situation. And then you can also thank the Giants' half-brain GM because in Hard Knocks, his son was dropping knowledge on him. Not once where he said he should pay pay Saquon instead of Daniel Jones, but twice where he told him, "Hey, trade up for Jaden Daniels; it'll change your life." He's like, "No, son, you only get this job once, so you might as well be as awful as possible." So the Giants, in a way, single-handedly helped the Commanders and the Eagles because if their GM actually listened to his son, we could have a Eagles team that got bounced in the first round, and then we could also have a Giants team with Jaden Daniels, who may or may not be in the playoffs, but the Commanders definitely wouldn't be.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, good lord, that Hard Knocks. I'm very curious to see who will end up being the offseason Hard Knocks because that just made the GM look like an absolute fool with Janet Daniels, especially with what he's become. For which forming into a star, you can give credit to Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury as well, and I'll give credit to the Bob Myers and the front office team for the Commanders as well. But the Giants single-handedly helped the Eagles and the Commanders get to this point. You let Saquon go for absolutely nothing. We got just as much for Saquon as the Giants did. And meanwhile, the Eagles picked him up on a 2-year deal. He single handedly had arguably the greatest running back season of all time. And then we have Jaden Daniels on the other side, who's having the greatest rookie season of all time. So if you want to have success in the NFL, the trick is to swindle the Giants or let the Giants swindle themselves, and that's how you're going to end up in this situation that the Eagles and Commanders find themselves in this upcoming weekend.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the Commanders are kind of at a lull in the middle of the regular season where everyone kind of had jumped off of ship for this team. It's kind of seemed like a readjustment period where at one point they were buried. The Cliff Kingsbury curse did kick in the middle of the season, and then suddenly they went on a run and they won six straight now. One possession games before that Lions game, or six in a row, came down to the last drive, and Jaden Daniels willed them to win that game. And sometimes it is the quarterback that you're with as much as it is the coordinator here because you can look at someone like Andy Reid, like, okay, how far can you take Alex Smith, Donovan McNabb, someone like Michael Vick? Um, in Philadelphia and in Kansas City, but if you don't have someone like Patrick Mahomes to really go out there with the ice in his veins to make plays and you actually have that additional character, which is what it comes down to, like how far can you actually take that team? And then also like Kyler Murray has never in the past few years ever looked like the Kyler Murray that was with Cliff Kingsbury. Tell you that. Like he looked much
Mm.
better under him. So now it's like, oh, Cliff Kingsbury gets buried and blamed this season. Well, they kind of fixed the offense, retooled, and then they won a bunch of close games. Like sometimes it isn't just on the coordinator. Like part of it is him, and he's grown for sure as a coach in the NFL. But I feel like some of it is also him just having the quarterback willing to listen to him and wanting to get better because they're asking Jaden Daniels, like, hey, you could be the first rookie in the Super Bowl. Don't care. I'm trying to just think about how I can get better week in and week out. I was like, okay, he's actually listening to his offensive coordinator. Unlike Kyler Murray, it's like, nah, bro, you need to put a film clause in my contract. I was like, okay, maybe it was the quarterback who didn't want to put in the
Yeah,
work.
yeah, absolutely. I think revisionist history is pretty detrimental to Kyler Murray at this point, especially with how bad he was this past year. How he single handedly the Cardinals had a chance to make the playoffs potentially and win their division. Then he completely wet his pants the last month of the season, and it's just been that way. They've done absolutely nothing since Cliff Kingsbury left, even as a team in rebuild. Meanwhile, with Jaden Daniels listening to Cliff Kingsbury, a guy who knows football and how successful they've been, what I'm also curious to see is Jaden Daniels is one of the first quarterbacks as a rookie that was using the new VR system when it came to processing information, learning their playbook. They were using, I believe it was an Oculus Rift to learn the plays he was doing in the preseason. He's been playing it just when he's bored around the house. He's been using this VR system that helps them read the plays. He can select which coverage it is, and he can select the play calls that are within the defense and the offensive schemes of the Commanders. And he
Don't
says
tell
that,
Justin Fields.
yeah, don't tell Justin Fields, clearly. And he says that that's helped him understand the game. He understands how to do the pre snap reads, in play reads, and then being able to make the right decision. And I feel like if it's been successful for him, I'm curious to see how these next generations of quarterbacks are going to be when they have that technology available to them, like the Shador Sanders and Cam Wards of the world, and then eventually the Quinn Ewers and Arch Mannings of the world when they come into the league. So he's kind of like the first blood of that, and it's obviously paid dividends for him and the Commanders. So that's another thing that he has going for him as far as the advantages as a rookie.
Yeah, that's actually a crazy pull because I haven't heard anyone else talk about that really, especially on like a national show, and it just adds so much more value. I feel like to the audience knowing that with the Oculus Rift, like that is like interesting because I have seen him warm up with that, but like he's kind of really been the only other quarterback doing that. Him, I think CJ Stroud has, I think done it a little bit, but I feel like that is actually a really good way. And then we're just gonna see like 40-year-old Matt Stafford next season using the Oculus Rift to process like the playbook and information. But I feel like it'll be like definitely a good way to bring rookies up to speed, where maybe you put them in plays and you can like recreate certain situations that happen for them. So you just drill it over and over again, especially for a rookie on the sideline, who maybe waits a year or two.
Especially for someone like Jaden Daniels, who's clearly football obsessed. Like the fact that it has your playbook call in there as well. And what he's been doing is he's been playing it at 1.75 speed. So it's been accelerated more than what you would normally see in the NFL, which explains why you've seen him, especially over the course of the year, develop into being as exceptional as he's been, being one of the more efficient quarterbacks over the last 3 months as well. So I give a lot of credit to him. I give credit to the organization too, because that's new technology that not everybody in the league has been adapting to. I think Caleb Williams would have benefited from that this year, to be completely honest, with how quick Jaden Daniels has developed. I definitely think we'll see that with future quarterbacks moving forward. So this could be the new generation potentially with what Jaden Daniels has done.
Yeah, that sounds very Bob Myers ish, to be honest, now that
Oh
you
yeah,
mentioned it.
ahead of the curb, absolutely. And the Commanders. Okay, one last thing about the Commanders themselves, outside of Jaden Daniels, is we're talking about like the ultimate underdog story, right? We talked about their odds entering the season. We thought that they were maybe going to compete for a wild card spot, but we didn't think they were going to be in the Super Bowl potentially. If they beat the Eagles, They will be the first team since the '08 Giants to win 3 straight games on the road as underdogs. And obviously, these last 3 teams I mentioned, the '99 Rams, the Bengals, the 2021, and the 2008 Giants, all these teams won the Super Bowl. Now, will they win the Super Bowl? We'll see, but they could go down as one of the greatest underdog stories in the history of the NFL potentially.
Yeah, probably. I mean, you took out the Lions, who are supposed to have their year this year. Philadelphia, who a lot of people were picking to go to the Super Bowl against a tough defense. And then you took out Tampa Bay, who is also a recent Super Bowl champion, had owned their division for the past couple of years. I mean, three straight division titles, and that was a dogfight, too. And the fact that they've kind of gotten better every single game towards the end of the year, like, yeah, this is definitely one of the biggest underdog stories. And I feel like people don't realize how huge it is that the Commanders are in the playoffs, because it feels like the reaction is like, oh, yeah, the Commanders are in the playoffs. It's like Jaden Daniels' rookie year, but like Jaden Daniels is a huge storyline and he's definitely a part of that. But like also, Dan Campbell having a massive redemption arc, immediately winning the breakup with the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, he leaves, the Cowboys are out of the playoffs. When he's there, they are in the playoffs. And then he goes to the Commanders, and he's clearly a player's coach. Like Micah Parsons loved him. All the Cowboys defenders on that team really did not want to see him go when he left there. And then just the fact that he dragged Cliff Kingsbury out of a whorehouse and was like, "Hey, in Asia, yeah, that's where he went." He was like, "Hey, stop playing, you know, with the chicks with dicks out in Thailand. Like, it's not okay. Stop watching The Hangover 2 over and over again. It's not for you. Like, we need to drag you out of that dark place." And then he puts them in the situation where he's the offensive coordinator. He has a redemption arc, and then just the entire franchise turns around within a year. And I feel like a team like the Commanders that was so successful so quickly gets a lot of people fired. Like, this is the exact team that owners look at as like, "Hey, why aren't you doing that?" And it's like, this is why we see so many teams move on too quickly from head coaches, sometimes quarterbacks. Like, not every team is meant to turn around that fast. Kind of like all the right pieces came together at the exact right time, where it was kind of like it was just one of those universe moments where it all just clicks and it all happened at the right time for this team. And this kind of feels the most, I guess, like the team of destiny that people really weren't paying attention to over the past few weeks. Like, yeah, they did just win 6 straight one possession games, one of them being a playoff game, and then they dismantled the Lions and made them turn the ball over 4 times. Like, I feel like, oh yeah, it was just the Lions who turned the ball over. It's like, no, some of those turnovers were actually just really good defensive plays, and the addition of Marshawn Lattimore in the middle of the season helped a lot, especially the addition of Frank Louvu there. Like, this is a defense that can maybe not shut a team down, but they can definitely create some turnovers and bend but not break. And that's kind of Dan Quinn's style. And what it always has been is he plays very aggressive on defense, trying to create a turnover. That's what he did in Dallas.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's impossible that we can see someone like a Jalen Hurts potentially make a turnover, or maybe we see like a drop from an AJ Brown or Devontae Smith of the world, a fumble from Dallas Goddard potentially. So that's why I think they beat the Eagles the past time they faced, and it's been a battle against these guys pretty much even before Jaden Daniels walked into that building. They've always been one of those weird teams in that division that always kind of had their number, or at least played competitively, even with the Taylor Heineke era with the Commanders. So I think this game is going to be excellent, no doubt about it. And then as far as like the Commanders, right? One last thing I'll say about Jaden Daniels before I give my prediction is like he has an opportunity to not only upset the Lions and Eagles and Bucks, like we mentioned, but if he can go to the Super Bowl and beat Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, no matter who makes it there, a chance to either upset the three-peat and become Patrick Mahomes, Eli Manning, or just dethrone Josh Allen potentially as the second best quarterback in that league. Like he's got an opportunity to not only completely insert himself in the top 5 comfortably, but he could be the second best quarterback in the league if he wins the Super Bowl this year.
No, he would have to be the second best quarterback because no one else has a Super Bowl. Like, it's as simple as that. And he would have to be either the best guy in the league to do that in Patrick Mahomes, or the guy who's currently like the third or fourth best player in the league doing that in Josh Allen. So it's
Yeah.
like the person he would have to be is crazy. And the fact that he would have gone to Philadelphia and one on the road with that crazy fan base is like a miracle on its own. And he honestly has the case to be the second best quarterback if he just gets to the Super Bowl because Philadelphia was one of the most dominant teams the year that they got to the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs when they got AJ Brown. And that was more of like an air raid attack team. And I feel like we haven't really seen that version of Jalen Hurts since. I don't know if it's the injuries he's been dealing with, but like this team kind of went through a Super Bowl hangover last year. And I feel like that's okay because the expectation kind of is a Super Bowl hangover, especially when you lose or even if you win, because it's tough to just work up the want to actually go out there and win a Super Bowl. And I feel like last season at the end of the year, they kind of punted on the Super Bowl, retooled this season, and then you see them create some stars in Jalen Carter, create some stars on the offensive line, and really rebuild this team and not miss a beat. And then you add someone like Saquon Barkley behind one of the top five offensive lines in the league this year. And now it all comes to the head where they have a home field advantage game. So it's like, do you feel like the same old Philadelphia Eagles never left and we can give them a pass for last year now?
Absolutely. I mean, people were calling for Nick Sirianni's job after they started off 11-0, and they fell apart at the end of the season. Part of that was also injuries, and the other part of that is like when you go through a full postseason run and you're playing an extra, call it 4 games, another 6 weeks of football after you guys have just played 17 games plus preseason, like that is not an easy task, and that's something that a lot of people would not really understand. And so, like going through that and falling out the way they did, like it obviously wasn't great last season, but the way they've been able to retool, Jason Kelsey retires, Fletcher Cox moves on. You're able to draft the right people to replace them respectfully. You get Cam Jurgens to replace Jason Kelsey, and then the players that you had drafted years before that were kind of getting groomed behind Fletcher Cox and these other guys, they've been able to step up. And then the absolute, arguably greatest free agency signing of all time with Saquon Barkley and what he's been able to do behind that offensive line. Like, I think the losses last year is what ultimately brought them to this point where you could see them make their second Super Bowl in 3 years. And then this time potentially win it because let's not forget that the year that they made the Super Bowl, they had Miles Sanders as their running back. Last year was D Swift, and then they upgrade to Saquon Barkley. I mean, how much more of an upgrade does that get going from Miles Sanders to Saquon Barkley? Somebody that the only person that I can put in the same breath as Saquon Barkley right now is Derrick Henry, and that's it. And right now, Saquon Barkley is having a better season all around. So the best running back in football, you were able to steal from your division rival, and has elevated this team to new heights, if that was even possible. Their defense has gotten better around him. Their offense, they don't even need Jalen Hurts to throw for 100 yards for him to win at this point, and he's more than capable of doing so. The Eagles, easily the scariest team for a team that fell off a little bit earlier this past season. They've come back roaring.
Yeah, no, they have come back roaring. They've come back flying, even some say. But yeah, I feel like them just reinventing themselves, like definitely helped out. And like you're allowed to do that when you've made a Super Bowl. Like sometimes it does take a year to just retool here. My concern coming into this game, though, and the reason why I think the Commanders can win is Jalen Hurts hurt his knee in that Rams game, and it was clearly bothering him in that game where he wasn't really running. They had an opportunity to do the tush push, and they didn't do that play. But they're like they kept asking him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, I finished the game." Like, and he was being like super like weird about it, and it seemed like he wasn't able to get the same push on the ball, and all the drives kind of stalled out after that knee injury. So I feel like with the Commanders, I think you should come out and just make Jalen Hurts beat you at first because with this team, if you just take away the massive plays from Saquon Barkley, what does their offense really have? All you have to do is just make the Eagles drive the ball because the difference in the game that they played with Saquon Barkley is at the end of the game, Saquon Barkley had like three massive rushes on that Thursday night football game that broke the game open. And at the beginning of the game, when they were turning the ball over, Saquon Barkley had like 100 rushing yards in the first quarter versus the Commanders. So like really it's harder said than done, but just limit those plays to if not 60 yards, how about 30 yards instead and make Jalen Hurts throw the ball. And I feel like that's what Dan Campbell's gonna he's like, I'm gonna play man to man coverage, stack the box, and I want you to prove that you can beat me throwing the ball down the field to AJ Brown because I don't think you can, especially with that knee injury. And I feel like the Commanders will be able to cut the turnovers. Jane Daniels has not been a turnover machine so far in the playoffs, so I feel like they'll probably have a fumble and an interception, maybe two turnovers in this game. But I feel like they'll be able to do enough on offense to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. The real test will be it's like, can you just stop Saquon Barkley from having two massive plays? Maybe you just allow one 60-yard rushing touchdown.
Yeah, I can agree. I feel like the Rams game was also telling because if you take out those two massive runs from Saquon, the Rams, for the most part, were able to contain him as best as they possibly could. He had, I want to say, about 130 rushing yards off of two rushes. And if you take those out, he had 24 rushes for about 60 yards. So they did a relatively decent job containing him, although the stats would not back that up. So the Commanders avoid those big runs, the runs that absolutely demoralize your defense. And again, easier said than done, but they have the talent around their defense. A lot of these guys are veterans. We have Bobby Wagner, who's, obviously he's not the same player he was with the Legion of Boom, but he's still a very solid linebacker. And then Frankie Louvu's been excellent for them. They have a lot of talent all around. Marshawn Lattimore again. So they have the defense that's capable of containing the Eagles. I also think that if they can cut down on, if Marshawn Lattimore can lock up AJ Brown as well and letting Devontae Smith expose you, or better yet, like relying on like Dallas Goddard potentially to expose you, like then at that point, I think that the Commanders, with how efficient their offense has been, no matter what defense has faced them, then I do think that they're going to put a lot of pressure on this Eagles team. By the way, again, we talk about this again, a team that has way more pressure on them than the Commanders. Commanders will lose this game and they will still go down as one of the best underdog stories in NFL history. Jaden Daniels will have one of the best rookie seasons of all time. Like, they've already cemented their legacy even without a victory this year. So if they go out there and beat the Eagles and they make the Super Bowl, then I mean, they're playing with house money right now. So I will take the Commanders to win this game. I don't think they're going to roll them. I think it's going to be a great game overall, but I think the Commanders are going to win. I'm going to go 31-21 with a late game score that inflates the lead a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel like that's like a good score for this game. But yeah, I feel like the Commanders have kind of just played to their competition the past few games where they let the Lions get a lot of big plays, but it felt like they mostly had to play prevent defense. And I feel like the Lions offense is just way different than Philadelphia at this point because if Jalen Hurts is hurt, like it looked like he hurt his knee on that play, and it feels like every time Jalen Hurts has stepped on the field for the past two seasons, he's always dealing with something. He's always grimacing on the sideline here. So just play man to man coverage and then force them to beat you throwing the ball. And I think you can go out there and win this game because, as he said, the Philadelphia Eagles have all of the pressure on them in this game. And this Commanders team feels very similar to that Cincinnati Bengals team that went to the Super Bowl. Very similar.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So I'm going to pick the Commanders to win. And then my Super Bowl would look like Josh Allen versus Jaden Daniels, and you have Chiefs and Commanders, which if I had my crystal ball now, I'd probably pick somebody from the AFC to win that game. But I think that we're set up for a Commanders Super Bowl appearance.
Yeah, no. Chiefs and Commanders, though, in the Super Bowl. Imagine that game goes to overtime.
Imagine if Jaden Daniels beats Mahomes, and that's what causes him not to have a three-peat, is Jaden Daniels getting in his way. That would be great for NFL history.
Very good. Yeah, that would be probably the best thing for NFL history, though. Another quarterback arises, and then you have like another version of Mahomes, but in the NFC. And the thing about that would be, though, the advantage that Mahomes has over all of these young quarterbacks is sometimes when you're a young quarterback, you have a really good offensive coordinator and you click with them, and then you lose that offensive coordinator. Then you go through like a year or two of a funk where like Patrick Mahomes will never have that problem because Andy Reid runs the offense, which I feel like is what gives the Chiefs the advantage and why they've had so much more consistency than some of these other teams.
Yeah, I agree. Especially with you have the best play caller in NFL history with Andy Reid. So
But yeah.
it'll be interesting to see what the Chiefs though, like with this win or loss, depending if they win or lose against the Bills or whoever they face in the Super Bowl. Like, Travis Kelsey looks a lot older. He might retire potentially. His brother's already retired at this point, and he's become a big celebrity in his own right. And then Andy Reid's a little bit older. It's like I'm not saying that the dynasty's going anywhere because Mahomes is only 28, I believe. But I do think that the next this iteration of the Chiefs dynasty is is closer to it being over than it is for it being at its its peak at this point.
Maybe.
And I say that
I don't. Go ahead. Sorry, you cut out.
I say that only because Travis Kelsey's going to be 35 and Andy Reid is approaching 70. Andy Reid could probably coach for the next few years, but I know he's had health concerns as well. So that would be my big concern. Now they still have a great GM and they still have great people in that organization, but losing Andy Reid, what would that do for Patrick Mahomes? I don't think it's going to cause a precipitous drop, but I still think that losing those two massive figures who have been the glue for you for your entire career, it's definitely going to be, I think, a year of adjusting from that if that were to happen.
Yeah, and yeah, with that's kind of a crazy idea too, because say Andy Reid only coaches one more year. All right, maybe we give him another year if they win the Super Bowl here, especially with your timeline, because I think everything you're saying is realistic with Kelsey retiring and Andy Reid retiring soon. What if the Andy Reid retiring and the 49ers getting sick of Kyle Shanahan lines up like at the exact same time? And then Kyle Shanahan's like, I think it'd be better if I left and coach Patrick Mahomes.
That would be insane. Talk about
It's
having
kind of
maybe the
lining
most.
up.
I mean, it is. I mean, let's look at how old Andy Reid is, right? Andy Reid is, I believe, 68, if I'm not mistaken. And he's been coaching since the fucking 70s. He's 66 years old. He'll be 67 in the off season. And he's had a number of health issues, so it's not like it's crazy to say that he could retire. He's been coaching since the late 90s with the Eagles, and he's started coaching in 82 with BYU as a graduate student. So is it unforeseen for us to say that, okay, maybe this is, you know, give it about 2 or 3 years potentially, and this could be the last of Andy Reid potentially as he retires, especially if he wins his fourth Super Bowl. You win four Super Bowls with the legacy that you already have. I know you don't have as many as Belichick, but you have a Super Bowl as a coordinator with the Packers, and you have a Super Bowl, three of them with the Chiefs. Like, it's going to be kind of hard for us to deny him, even if he doesn't get the rings that Belichick has.
And with the Chiefs too, like, do you feel like it's gonna be like coaches are going to be worried about like not being able to build their own legacy in Kansas City where maybe like some ego gets in the way with that, or do you feel like it would be a situation where both Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are looking at each other like, don't do it, I want to do it?
I mean, if I'm Sean McVay, I've already proven that I can win elsewhere. I've done it with the Rams. You join the Chiefs, like, if I'm either of those guys, I don't let my ego get in the way. Like, this is the difference. We saw what Andy Reid did with Donovan McNabb. He was successful. We saw what he did with Michael Vick. He was successful. Alex Smith successful. But you get Patrick Mahomes, you get a once in a generation Tom Brady esque quarterback. Like, put your ego aside simply for the fact that look at how much he's won. He's 8-0 in the divisional round. He's only lost to Joe Burrow and Tom Brady in his entire career. He has 3 playoff losses. He hasn't thrown an interception in the divisional round. Like, there are just a number of notable stats that point to him being God, basically. Get your ego aside. If Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan goes to take over that spot potentially in the next 4 or 5 years, like, I think that would be amazing for football.
Yeah, because I feel like that could happen. Like thinking about it, like I feel like that would be a situation where the Chiefs will be able to handpick whoever they want for that position. Like maybe Belichick is like, maybe college isn't for me."
Yeah, no doubt about it. Plus, also, like, Belichick wants the Shula record, right? Shula, 347 wins. Andy Reid's not that far from that. And he could probably get it a lot sooner. Like, he's got 300 total wins now. If he wins the Super Bowl, it'll be at 302. That really gives him, like, realistically, like, 3 or 4 more seasons, and he's going to have the record for most wins all time and potentially another Super Bowl or two. So he could get what he needs. And I feel like once we have the wins record and multiple Super Bowls, what are you playing for at that point? You don't need anything else.
Yeah, I feel like 5 rings for Andy Reid. If they win this year, I feel like the temptation will still be there to come back. So I feel like maybe give Andy Reid maybe 1 or 2 more years, but maybe he's happy with the three-peat. And like the health issues could play a big factor there, but I don't know how severe they've been for him.
Yeah, I know that they've been there, but I don't know how personal it's been personally. But I guess, we'll see. Um, but nonetheless, like by the end of this conference championship, we're going to have the legacies of Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, all formed, at least to some extent, after this game. So credit to them. I'm excited to see these games play out. The battle of Mahomes and Allen is always a great game. And then we get the battle of the NFC East as well. Like, can't get better. Now, for some of these teams who are on the outside looking in, they want to see the success that these teams are having, right? And the Jets think they found their guy. Aaron Glenn, the DC for the Lions, is now officially hired for the Jets head coaching job, and he's going to start filling out his staff. But this was news that we got between last night's episode and this week's episode here. Aaron Glenn, the new head coach for the Jets. Now, I don't have the highest regards for this because I think Aaron Glenn's a great leader, and I think that he's a locker room guy, and I think he's good. I think being a head coach he'll be fine with. However, as a defensive coordinator, I don't think he was an excellent defensive coordinator. I think there was a lot of times where they had questionable game wasn't always the right fit. I think that because of where he went with the Jets, with the dysfunction there, with the lack of quarterbacks there, like I'm curious his success that he's going to have with the Jets, because I feel like that is the black hole of head coaching positions. So it's great for Aaron Glenn getting an opportunity, and it's great for the Jets because I think he's going to be a fine head coach somewhere. I just don't know if this opportunity is the great first opportunity that you would want, especially with Woody Johnson and the mess that is that organization.
Yeah, no, this organization's gonna be tough, and I feel like it's gonna be very similar to like when Todd Bowles was with the Jets, but like you do raise a good point. Like some of the Lions defense, like some of it didn't feel like talent. Sometimes it did feel like it came down to scheme here because there were some massive breakdowns from this team, and sometimes it felt like the defense could have been maximized a little bit more, especially last season. Like you can't blame the entire meltdown just on the offense, just on Dan Campbell going for it. Like at some point, like your defense also has to feed off the offense and get some stops as well down the line here. And they kind of just got walked all over in a couple games, and then you just allowed 45 points to the Commanders, even though, he had a lot of players injured, but sometimes it did feel like it came down to coaching where early on with the Lions, some guys were just in the complete opposite place where they were supposed to be, where if at least they were coached well, they could have been in the right position. Some of these big plays could have been avoided and they could have saved some pain for Detroit at least. But I feel like he has been a good defensive coordinator, but that's really not the engine for the Detroit Lions here. So I'm happy that he got a job. I'm happy he's the head coach for the Jets, but I don't think he's gonna be as good of a head coach as Robert Saleh, personally.
I don't think so either. And again, like, yeah, and I think with Robert Sala, like, at least he had the opportunity to draft his quarterback, and then he was able to get Aaron Rodgers for 5 games. But I just think with this situation, like they're not going to be able to get a great quarterback. You might see a reunion of Sam Darnold potentially in New York. Like they don't have a clear path to success. Whereas like a team like the Saints, right? You suck for this year. You guys go and draft a quarterback this upcoming year, then you guys are in a good position. I do think is something that we could see again. We could see him maximizing Sauce Gardner potentially and a number of other great players that they have on that team. DJ, I think the defense will be back to being good, but again, you don't have an offense. So who's the offensive coordinator? Read so, and that's who I want to see here. Who's going to be able to maximize the offense? Because right now you're looking at who even is their quarterback. I can't even point to a quarterback in that Jets system. They're going to have to go out and get someone like a Sam Darnold or try and get I don't know Daniel Jones or one of those guys because you're not going to be able to draft guy. You're like I think the 8th overall pick, and by then all the guys are going to be gone. You get Quinn Ewers. Give me a break.
Yeah, hook 'em, Quinn. Let's go. Um, Yeah, this team will be tough though. I feel like the problem with when you have like a coach with a style like Dan Campbell and he's like training, like coaching other guys and getting them head coaching jobs, like this the first time two coaches out of Dan Campbell's tree we're seeing go out into the NFL and come back here. And I feel like the tough part is gonna be like Dan Campbell has a very specific style that you have to have certain qualities to pull off. And I'm not saying Aaron Glenn can't do that, but it takes a very specific person to deliver a Dan Campbell type of message. So it's like sometimes you've seen like coordinators go out from the Patriots, like Josh McDaniels or Matt Patricia, go out there and flop other places because they've tried to put in Bill Belichick's style without really his cachet or experience here. And like with Dan Campbell, it kind of worries me when I see his other head coaches go out there. Like, are they going to be too much like rah rah like Dan Campbell? And are players gonna buy into that, especially in a situation like the New York Jets, where you have a Kyrie Irving figure and Aaron Rodgers who still may be there?
Yeah, I think that's very valid, especially again, like an organization like the Jets is more than just a 1 year rebuild. Like this team needs to change its culture. You need to reinvent what the Jets are and what they've become. And I guess, similar to what the Lions were. So I guess they were a part of reinventing the Lions. However, I think what helped reinvent the Lions was their GM being excellent. The Jets don't have a GM currently. And then also Dan Campbell also played a big part in that as well, redefining them, loving them even when they were at their worst. And I just don't think the Jets have the patience to do that because, I mean, if they're going to make that trade for Aaron Rodgers a few years ago, like they believe that they're not that far away, despite the fact that their offensive line sucks and they don't have a quarterback anymore. I just don't know if they have the patience to give him like what the Ford family did for the Lions. And that's probably my biggest concern here is like, do I think he could be a successful head coach? Yes. But I think he would have been more successful with, say, the Saints or some of these other teams that are still available. But he played for the Jets and his heart's in New York. So credit to him. This media also in New York is pretty nasty as well. More often than not, they expect too much out of their teams. So ultimately, it's going to be interesting to see how they play out. But right now, if I had to put my money on it, I would probably say that this Jets situation is probably not going to pan out for him. His second opportunity, maybe so.
It's tough. Yeah, like it's a tough situation. Not all of it is on Aaron Glenn because if he's in a perfect situation, I feel like he could be a good, fine head coach. But is it going to be a situation he'll be able to turn around? Like the Jets is a tough code to crack, and Todd Bowles, head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, got a second shot. Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator, 10-6. Yeah, 10-6 for the New York Jets. Barely missed the playoffs where they should have made it there. So it's like he had a great run there. He wasn't able to crack the code. Robert Sala hasn't been able to crack the code. I mean, if Adam Gase can't do it, who can at the end of the day?
That's true. Adam Gase was not successful. That's a concern that you could have potentially for someone like and we mentioned this last episode with Ben Johnson, right? I think Ben Johnson's going to be fine because he has his quarterback. But when you have an offense that's filled with talent like that, the opportunities for you to, when you go somewhere else and you don't have the Amon Ra's of the world and the Sam Laportas and not one but two great running backs and a top 10 quarterback, like when they switch over, there is situations like Adam Gase where I'm not saying that Ben Johnson is Adam Gase. However, he had Marvin Harrison, he had Reggie Wayne, he had Peyton Manning, made it look a lot easier than what it was. They had very inventive play calls, and I think we can say that Ben Johnson's not Adam Gase. However, it's not impossible that that fails either. And also, if we tie it to Detroit, right? This is the first head coaching situation since the Eagles back in 2022, who made the Super Bowl, where they lose both their offensive and defensive coordinator, Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon for the Eagles. And we saw what happened to them the following year, right? They started off hot and then they kind of crumbled at the end. With the Lions, with them losing their offensive and defensive coordinator, do you see next season being a situation where they take a step back? Maybe they miss the playoffs, or maybe they just aren't the same Lions that we've seen the last 3 years.
No, I feel like we're gonna see the same Lions. Now instead of maybe being 15, like 15-2. I think we may see like a 12-5 Lions team this time around where they come back to earth a little bit, but they're still winning games. However, you had 16 players on injured reserves defensively, and the unfair thing and the common thread that you do not bring into the situation is the Lions don't have D Swift on their team. Like that is why the Eagles fell apart. Is D Swift showed at the beginning of the season? They're like, "Wow, look at D Swift run behind this offensive line in Week 3," and then Week 13 came, and they're like, "D Swift, please do something. Please, we just need you to not turn into Homer Simpson disappearing into the bush. Like this is what we wanted out of him." And I feel like that is what happened there. And I feel like with the Lions defense and the ability to draft with what they've had, like, make no mistakes about it. Like, Ben Johnson's a great play caller. Aaron Glenn was a fine defensive coordinator, but Dan Campbell gave them the opportunity. He was the one who mentored them, and they knew Ben Johnson was going to move on this year. They knew Aaron Glenn was probably going to move on this year. You don't think Dan Campbell's been planning for that? I think so. So I feel like they do have like two good coaches in position there. And as far as the draft and like just the defense being healthy, that's an automatic reappearance in the conference championship for you next year. You still have the same offensive line and you have a run game to lean on. We don't need to go super glitz and glamour all the time. Sure, Ben Johnson's plays were fun, but sometimes that hurt them, a la the Jamison Williams interception. You don't think that hurt them in that playoff game where you could have
Absolutely.
just drove the ball down the field and got a touchdown instead of turning it over in the fourth quarter down 10?
Yeah, I think that was the final blow for them against the Commanders. But I think you're right when it comes to finding their replacements. It's going to be interesting to see who he puts in front of him, both offensively and defensively. I don't think the Lions are going anywhere, but I do see them taking a small step back. Hot take: they're not going to be 15-2 for back-to-back seasons. Who would have thought? Now we talk about the Jets hiring Aaron Glenn, but a team that has not hired anybody at this point, and it looks like a complete disaster. How about the Jaguars? Right? Jaguars, they said 2 weeks ago, we're not firing our GM. Our GM's doing a great job. They interview Ben Johnson. They interview a number of other guys, Lee and Cohen from the Bucks. And then Ben Johnson says, I don't like the vibe here. I'm going to go to Chicago. Lee and Cohen, they offer him the job, and he goes, no thanks. I'm going to stay in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield and the gas station Bucky Irving. And then shortly after he says no, they fire the GM. And just like that, the GM of the Jaguars are gone, and they still don't have a head coach. And it's looking kind of like a mess. Everybody that they wanted to have, whether Ben Johnson or Liam Cohen or whoever else, has slipped through the cracks for them. And now their head coaching search begins, and they're having a hard time filling their head coaching position because of lack of stability, lack of quarterback play potentially. We don't know who's going to go there.
Yeah, it's weird to me because the Jets have filled their coordinator position or their head coaching position here, and the Jaguars haven't. The Saints haven't, the Cowboys haven't, and the Raiders haven't. That's four other teams that passed on Aaron Glenn, and then the Jets decided to hire him. I don't know if that's a fault on the Jets or what, but I feel like with the Jacksonville Jaguars, their best solution at head coach next year is going to be Joe Brady. I mean, if there is someone who can just make it easier on Trevor Lawrence and fix fundamentally what is wrong with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I feel like Joe Brady would be the perfect candidate for that job. I know he's going to interview with the Saints, and so is Kellen Moore. And so if the Bills lose and the Eagles lose, like I predicted this week, then we're going to see potentially Kellen Moore to the Cowboys and Joe Brady either to the Saints or the Jaguars here. But I feel like Joe Brady is someone that they should hire there. But like the Jets were a better opportunity, people felt like, than the Jaguars. Like that's concerning. I feel like Trevor Lawrence is him and his contract creates like this radioactivity around the Jaguars, especially with how impulsive Shad Khan has been. It's like, okay, you had Doug Peterson, he was good for a season, kind of got worse. The Urban Meyer disaster, Doug Marone, Blake Bortles, like
Gus Bradley.
Gus Bradley, yeah. This Tom Coughlin just kind of being around there with his aura for the past couple years when he was old.
Yeah, I just think like the Jaguars, they have the bad owner going against them. Now they don't have a general manager, which I don't know if he was just a bad general manager. He wasn't there very long. I think he was only there for 2 years, so that wasn't great. And so now you look at your head coaching opportunities. If they miss on Brady, at this point, like who are they going to go for? Are they going to go for somebody in college potentially? Like this is a very important hire for the Jags because Trevor Lawrence is starting to look like a bust if he's not already. You need somebody who's going to be able to unlock him, unlock the Tank Bigsby's of the world, Travis Etienne's, Evan Ingram's, all the guys on that team. Like, if you don't get your guy and you end up going for your seventh or eighth option, like, I just don't know how successful they're going to be and if they're going to get their coach. I feel like what's going to ultimately happen is they're going to hire their head coach GM and then they're going to just fire whoever they end up hiring this following year. And that's not going to be fair to whoever they hire. It's basically going to be the sacrificial lamb. You might as well hire Lovey Smith if that's the case and let him be the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, no, Lovey Smith, no, give Hugh Jackson another shot. He deserved it.
Oh, he deserves it, Mr. 336 and 1.
Yeah.
No shot.
Offensive coordinators, Freddie Kitchens. Let's go.
Freaky
Matt Patricia at DC. Let's make the worst coaching roster of all time.
Ben McAdoo. Let make it happen.
Yeah.
McAdoo is a wackadoo. Other
We'll
news
make
as far
Eddie
as head
Lacy the running backs coach.
conditioning coach. Good lord. Other news outside of the Jags though is the Bengals have replaced Lou Anarumo with the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. I'll get his exact name here, but they fill their defensive coordinator spot. He is now going to fill in the big shoes that was Lou Anarumo. Um, Al Golden will now be the coordinator for the Bengals.
Congrats, Al.
Congrats, Al. So interesting to see how that plays out,
I don't
especially
know.
because their defense didn't stop Ohio State like at all. I think, if I'm not mistaken, their quarterback completed like 17 consecutive passes in the national title game. And then the Bengals were like, yep, that's our guy. He's going to be our
Yeah,
defensive coordinator. Will he turn around that team? Probably not, if I'm
there you
being
go.
honest.
Yeah, keeping your whole staff Catholic. It feels like the Bengals have had like the most Catholic staff when they had their offensive coordinator still last year. Like him, Zach Taylor, and Lou Anarumo all had like the cross chain. They all kind of look like altar boys too. And it's like, and then
Yeah,
you're hiring another Notre Dame guy. It's like keep Cincinnati Catholic. That just seems like the motto here. And it's like he's coming from college, so honestly, I'm not as educated to give an opinion on him. I haven't seen him in the NFL before, really. So hopefully this pans out for Cincinnati and they know what they're doing. They should know what they're doing a lot better than I would. So this better be a good hit there for them. But hopefully he pans out.
absolutely. And then now we have the Saints, Raiders, Jags, and Cowboys who are left to fill their head coaching positions here. Chances are for the Cowboys, we're looking at Brian Schottenheimer or Kellen Moore to fill the shoes of Mike McCarthy, and dare I say, the big shoes of Mike McCarthy. So now we have these four head coaching hires left. Of these guys, in my humble abode, I think the Saints are going to probably bring back Darren Rizzi, their interim head coach that they had. Seems like they're just kind of similar to Antonio Pierce. They just like what they saw with him. The Raiders, they got their GM hired, so now they have the brains of the operation now and what they want to do. So we should hear a head coaching hire probably by next episode. And then obviously we talked about the Jags and Cowboys and the mess that they've been.
Yeah. Yeah, the Saints is interesting. I hope they go with someone like Joe Brady here. I feel like he should be like the next biggest offensive coordinator. He's only 35 years old, completely turned around the Buffalo Bills and reinvented their offense, kind of saved Josh Allen's career a little bit because he cut out all of the turnovers there, helped them get back to the conference championship for the first time since they had Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator and he left and went to the Giants. It's like, all right, like the offensive coordinator clearly made a difference here with them getting back to the AFC Championship, and really the real reason is Brian Dayball. getting replaced with Joe Brady. So I feel like the Saints are interviewing him and Kellen Moore. So I think they're gonna go offense. Just with Darren Rizzi, it's like, do the Saints really want to hire internally again? Because that's what they did with Dennis Allen. And it's like, if you do that again, it's like, okay, the Saints probably aren't going anywhere. I don't see Darren Rizzi like suddenly shocking people. He just reminds me of the candy bar guy you showed me. It's
The
like, hey,
candy bar guy.
that's
Oh
a
yeah.
fucking candy bar.
Oh yeah, the motivational guy. Yeah, that guy sucks. Yeah, I think Darren Rizzi's going to be better off going somewhere else. Maybe the Jags take an opportunity for him. I don't know how great of a head coach he was. I mean, considering the Saints finished the season on a 4-game losing streak, and like, granted they had Spencer Radler, but it's not like they were like, oh yeah, this team's playing competitive, great football. Like, they're getting blown out on national television. So I don't really have a great pulse for how great of a coach he'll be. Good locker room guy, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be the right call. But it is interesting because we have these head coaching hires where we're trying to see, whose shoes are going to be filled at this point. But now, like, we're looking at 2025 as well. Like, we're going to see the Jags get their new head coach. We're going to see, obviously, the Jets announce Aaron Glenn and all these other guys, the Raiders, right? But there's also teams that, they didn't fire the head coach and maybe they should have. Maybe it's a team like the Dolphins that we look at, or maybe a team like the Tennessee Titans who are vulnerable there as well. But looking at 2025, like, who stands out as far as like who's next on the chopping block?
Yeah, I feel like you mentioned it early on with Mike McDaniels, but honestly, I feel like someone like Shane Steichen should definitely be closely examined because he was mentioned as coach of the year for almost making the playoffs with how impressive it was. This was the most impressed people were have been by a team missing the playoffs. Like, look what he did with Gardner Minshew. And then the Anthony Richard experiment has backfired so far. So if that doesn't get figured out next year, I feel like the Colts are going to cut ties with him and kind of just move on. So I feel like he's going to be someone who's on the hot seat next year. And then also, you hate to say it, and it's weird to say, but someone like Kyle Shanahan, who every single year, where maybe it's not a hot seat, where it's like, if it doesn't work out this year, it's like we've tried so many iterations of this team. We get to a Super Bowl twice. Like, maybe it's time we both go our separate ways. And I feel like it'd be more Kyle Shanahan wanting to go to a different situation if he's not able to get his quarterback. Maybe the Chiefs' job or someone else's job comes available. I feel like Kyle Shanahan, like Shane Steichen, and Mike McDaniels all are probably going to be closely examined next season on the hot seat.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think some other games I'd shut out. Surprisingly, he was not fired this time around, but Brian Dayball, if they completely collapse again, like they had this past season, granted, quarterback play is important and you have your quarterback, but if they go 3-14 again and they're a complete embarrassment like they were this time around, then that's a team that could be going. I think also you look at a team like the Cardinals with Jonathan Gannon. They've done nothing with him so far, and it doesn't really look like they're going to go anywhere with him. I haven't been overly impressed with him as a head coach, blowing my mind by any means. I know they're still in a rebuild, and Cardinals are historically a pretty patient franchise. I think you gave Cliff Kingsbury, I think, 5 years as your head coach. Granted, they actually had success with him, but the Cardinals, if they don't at least make a wild card position, then they're probably going to move on from Jonathan Gannon, if I were to guess.
Yeah, I feel like that's another good pull there. And a lot of people say, "What about Mike Tomlin's?" Like, what about Mike Tomlin? But also, I feel like the Bengals not firing Zach Taylor, like they could have fired him this year, and they're giving him one more chance. And if it doesn't work out this season and you miss the playoffs, gone. Conference championship or he has to be gone. There's no way that Zach Taylor should be back next season. So I feel like that's gonna be a that's gonna be someone else who like he should be on the hottest of seats because he's wasting Joe Burrow's career and he's also wasting the potential of the Cincinnati Bengals because this team refuses to show up the first 8 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and we're talking about a situation where if it's gonna be impacting his legacy to the point where he goes from being the Peyton Manning of this generation to Drew Brees. No disrespect to Drew Brees, but this guy has an opportunity to be the second best quarterback in this league, potentially winning Super Bowls with them. They have Jamar Chase, who's been excellent, and Chase Brown has been excellent for them too. But with how pathetic their defense was, with how they didn't wake up until fucking week 8. Like they've been doing this consistently for the last 3 seasons ever since they made the Super Bowl, and they've logged their way to 9-8, which is, a good thing for the Cincinnati's Bengals franchise historically, but not when you have the second best quarterback in the league, at least second best quarterback at best, fourth best at worst. Like you have a guy that's going to be the only guy that's beaten Patrick Mahomes, and you guys had to fight to be above 500. That's pathetic at this point. And if they start slow again, you might as well just fire him in season at this point. I'm sick of this shit. Like this is a guy that they're ruining iconic performances, whether it be Lamar Jackson versus Joe Burrow in the playoffs, or Josh Allen, or hell, obviously Patrick Mahomes, but also like Herbert and C.J. Stroud, and versus Sean Payton. Like there's great matchups that we're missing out on because they can't wake up for the first half of the season.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Like, it's inexcusable. Like, I kept like pointing out to people, they're like, "Oh," I'm like, "Yeah, like the reason they lost the playoffs, missed out on the playoffs, is because they lost to the Patriots." Like, "Oh, it's just one game." It's like, "Yeah, it is just one game versus the Patriots." Like, that's an inexcusable game, especially going up Jacoby Brissett. It's like it's inexcusable for you to not make the playoffs. So I feel like the Bengals' job is definitely one that could come available next season. So maybe you see, you know Cliff Kingsbury step into that position.
Yeah. If not, maybe Joe Brady, like you mentioned. If he doesn't get one of these jobs that remain, maybe he waits and picks the Bengals. That's kind of similar to some extent what Ben Johnson did going to a rival. That could be something that could be pretty spicy, I think.
Yeah, especially if you don't win the Super Bowl. I would wait this year if I'm Joe Brady. If I win the Super Bowl, okay, I won Josh Allen the Super Bowl, then I can leave. And if he never wins the Super Bowl again, guess who engineered Josh Allen's only Super Bowl winning season? Me. I mean, what a flex is that?
That's a massive flex. So I guess we'll see. I mean, I think the people that we have on the hot seat are, I think, very appropriate to be there. Brian Callahan for the Titans, I don't think they're going to fire him right away, unless if it's a complete colossal disaster with whoever their quarterback is. But I feel like he'll be secure. Give him somebody that doesn't make memes every week with Will Levis. So I think our list is pretty legit.
What about Mike McDaniels though? Because I feel like we talked about some other head coaches like Zach Taylor at length who have accomplished more than him, but like I feel like he should have been gone yesterday.
I think it should have been gone this year. I mean, good lord. I mean, granted, I understand that Tua was hurt for multiple, for the reasons why he haven't made the playoffs. However, when he's not there, when Tua, who's probably the 15th best quarterback in the league, and I think that's a fair assessment. We'll just put him right in the middle. You're terrible. You guys are like literally the worst team in football when he's not on the field. You can't utilize Tyreek Hill. You can't utilize Jalen Waddle, and for some reason, Devon Achane, for some reason, walks like he's handicapped at that point. Like I don't understand it. So for him, for a guy who came off of the Kyle Shanahan tree, I just don't find his play calls to be very inventive. I understand you guys have a lot of speed, but what have you done for a team that you're not in the most competitive division? I know you have the Bills, but the Jets are a disaster and the Patriots are a disaster still. So, like, if you're not going to succeed when you guys have this talent, you guys go all in with Jalen Ramsey and everybody else, like, get his ass out of there. Go ahead and get somebody who's going to be a more competent head coach. And then maybe you guys make the swing and maybe move on from two at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I feel like he's someone who definitely should have been on the hot seat, but it's gonna take like a colossal failure in the playoffs. But like, I feel like just the vibe of that team, like it just feels like they're never gonna win a playoff game with this era.
Now, do you fear that he could be the Marvin Lewis? Because the Dolphins have a low self-esteem. They haven't been successful since Dan Marino. So if they keep making the playoffs with Tua and they just run into Josh Allen, Lamar, and Patrick Mahomes and maybe Joe Burrow, that's enough for them to be like, well, we keep running into better guys. Like it's okay. We have better teams in
Yeah.
front of us. Just keeping him.
No, I think that's a great comparison. Actually, he would definitely be the logic of Marvin Lewis's.
Yeah. I just his shtick is running dry in my mind, and I feel like he's probably going to be gone next year.
Yeah, we'll see though. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting head coaching moves, and then we can do that full preview next week. But yeah, definitely an interesting week, and I feel like we're gonna see a lot of dominoes drop after the conference championship games and find out a lot.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And then, so we talked about the conference championship, we talked about the head coaching hires, who might be next to be fired in 2025. And then obviously the teams that are there, how they got there. And then, we do have our top five to talk about at one point here. But other side of the pond here, we have the NBA. And we like to talk about the NBA, especially when the NFL is in the off season. And we'll be talking about it a lot more as we get closer to the end of the Super Bowl and what we'll cover in the off season, going over drafts, but as well as the NBA. I mean, right now we're looking at in the forefront here, we got the Cavaliers, who are the one seed currently, kind of surprising people this year with how good they've been. And then the Thunder, which I think everyone kind of predicted to be exceptional. Um, just as far as the NBA right now, like how everything has shaken out.
Yeah. I feel like it's been an interesting regular season so far. Like the Cavaliers are going on this dominant run, and it just doesn't feel like it's gonna have that massive of an impact this season. I feel like they're just a outmanned and outmatched team versus the Celtics. Celtics have kind of hit a lull in the middle of the regular season, but I feel like we're definitely on a collision course for Boston versus OKC, which was my prediction before the season for the NBA. And it's kind of once I saw the free agency pickups of Hartenstein and Caruso, kind of solidified that in my mind because they've been dominating some of the best competition in the West without Chet Holmgren or Hartenstein. And it's really been players like just Lou Dort and both Jalen Williams getting better because yeah, they have two Jalen Williams who absolutely ball out on this team. And then
Curse.
SGA, it feels like this is definitely his MVP season. He's been the storyline. He just dropped 50 points in a game here. So I feel like the Thunder seem like the clear favorite in the West. And the Celtics, I mean, they seem vulnerable. Brian Windhorst said they're more vulnerable than they were last year, but it just seems like this point they're just kind of in a lull this season. But I feel like the most dangerous team in the East, as far as a threat to Boston, is going to be the Hawks.
Yeah, the Hawks have been sneaky good this year. I think with the Celtics, like kind of like what we saw with the Chiefs this past, like this pretty much this entire season is like they're in game 44 of the season and they have another 40 games before they're even in the postseason. And then when they are, it's like that's when they switch into the next gear. So I feel like we're not going to see the best of the Celtics until probably mid March when they start to get their rhythm going again. But if they're the two seed or the one seed, I don't think it matters too much to them because I don't think they're scared of the Cavaliers and I don't think they're scared of the Knicks. The Bucks, like, yeah, the Bucks have given them trouble in the past, but ultimately, like, there's really no team that really scares me for the Celtics. They're the best shooting team. They have a great defense as well. They have a great head coach. So Celtics, like, they're probably just sleepwalking, to be honest. If they cruise, they'll probably win, anywhere between 50 to 60 games. So am I worried about the Celtics? No. They'll probably make a move during the deadline. But there's nobody in the East that really scares me there at this point. Maybe the Bucks, but again, they're old. They've proven to beat the Bucks in the past, so I'm not worried about them.
Yeah, and I think too, like this season, like for the Celtics, like it can just be a case of them being bored there. But I feel like with them, they're a team that needs adversity. They need some extra motivation, but they're trying to develop players like Demisquita. They're trying to develop Jordan Walsh coming off the bench. They're letting Peyton Pritchard and Sam Hauser take shots that they don't normally take. But when it comes down to it in the playoffs, like they're going to be able to make all of the plays here. It does concern me that they kinda it's hard for them to incorporate Porzingis, and it sometimes it feels like they're just a better team without him, but, like, really the key for this team that everyone forgets about where Jason Tatum is great, Jaylen Brown is great, but really the cornerstone for this team and kinda the veteran who's been there the whole time has been Al Horford. Like, Al Horford is still out there making plays, hitting threes, he's starting when Porzingis isn't there, but really you bring in Porzingis to just extend Horford's career because maybe you don't need to use Porzingis in certain playoff moments, but like Horford still being there, just hitting threes, where all they really need him to do is hit threes. They don't need him to score on offense. They just need him to be a threat to shoot.
Yeah, exactly. And how Al Horford, like, coming along for the ride, like, I don't think they, I think the leadership that he brings is invaluable to this point. So It'll be interesting, like when it comes to the deadline. I know Porzingis is expensive. I know he's injury prone, and they could get a decent return back for Porzingis, especially for a team that's in need of a big. Like, do you see them in a situation where it's the trade deadline? They want to switch things up. They go ahead and trade Porzingis and maybe get back another big. You get back some draft capital, or maybe you strengthen your bench along with your big men at the same time.
Yeah, I could definitely see them doing that. Especially for the Celtics. I feel like that would make a lot of sense for them and another team where Porzingis has shown he can be good. He's kind of constantly been injured, but if you have a team trying to offload assets and maybe some contracts and players who want to win, I could definitely see it making sense for another team to trade for Porzingis. Maybe you work that out with Minnesota where you can exchange Porzingis for someone like Nas Reed if you package like Sam Hauser, Porzingis, like trade with Minnesota there because Nas Reed's been a great player off the bench for them. They need another tall guy who can shoot threes. So it definitely seems like a trade someone like Minnesota would do. Or maybe you trade him to the Jazz because they need more draft picks for some reason. You get someone like a Laurie Markkinen back.
Laurie Markkinen would fit well. This is more of a selfish pick for me, but I would pick the Spurs too. Imagine if you pair Wemby and Porzingis is playing your power forward position, what might be the tallest team in NBA history potentially. I know that the speaking of the Jazz, right? They traded with the Suns. They traded three first round picks for one first round pick later for the Suns. I want to say it was like 2038 or something like that, which I was very confused by. I don't know if you had saw that or not.
What was it?
They're basically just trading first round picks, and I was very confused. They traded a 2031 first round pick for three first round picks, and the way it broke down was the Jazz received the 2031 pick, and then the Suns received three unprotected three first round picks from the Jazz. That was a day
Interesting.
ago. Yeah, which for the Suns, I'm like, I'm not sure what that was about. And for the Jazz, I feel like it was a trade that for the Suns, it makes sense. They don't have any draft picks, so it makes sense. But why would the Jazz make that trade? They're one of the worst teams in the league. The Suns in 2031, like, they'll probably still have Devin Booker. They're historically a pretty solid team all around. Like, that's going to be like the 18th pick in the draft, most likely by then, if we had the crystal ball. Like, weird trade overall. I guess it doesn't mean that much yet, but just odd swap of picks to my mind.
It could be an interesting trade because if KD retires or leaves the Suns in the near future and then Devin Booker just wants to leave because they've never been able to put a good team around him and it's just time for him to go to San Antonio and play with Wemby, like I could definitely see the Suns sucking like in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, and that pick's gonna look a lot better if that's the case. But I'd like to see, a team like the Suns, a team like the Mavericks, maybe make a move during the deadline. The Suns, I think, they need a more or less depth, and then somebody who's going to make them better defensively. Because ultimately, the Suns, outside of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and a couple of role players as well. Never mind D Book. Like, they don't really have people to come off the bench for. They have Grayson Allen, who's been good for them, and then Bol Bol, who's always hurt. It seems like. And outside of that, they don't really have anybody else to really call their name. So the Suns, maybe that trade is for them to swap and get some players at the deadline. And I think the Mavericks are in the same boat. I think they need some help as well.
Yeah, and too, like on the Mavericks, like they need some help. Luca's been injured this season, but Luca is now been favored 5 seasons to be the MVP coming into the season, and now he's been declared ineligible to be MVP. But this is like kind of feels like Josh Allen esque, where he's kind of him or Joe Burrow are always the favorite to win MVP. None of them have ever really been able to go out there and do it, but Luca, the favorite again, and has never really been in the top two as far as MVP candidates here.
Yeah. It's interesting with him. And I think every time they've nominated him, he's been worthy of being in the MVP conversation. And I think he's shown that he's extremely valuable to them as well. But I think this also comes down to the rules that they added for players not being available. If you miss more than 65 games, then you're basically out. This past season, he was third in the MVP. But every single year he's been out. I think he's never played more than 70 games, which was last year, and before that it was 65. So interesting to see. I mean, it makes sense why he's favorited. I feel like he is due for an MVP at some point, kind of like the Josh Allens and Joe Burrows of the world. But in my mind, like when I think about that rule and I think about why he's not eligible this year, I'm not super in love with the games, like the games minimum. At least I feel like it's maybe a little too high. I think maybe like 62 games or 60 games would be a better number, just because I think people get dinged up throughout the season. But um, I'm not surprised by what you say there as far as him being MVP. But 5 consecutive times, like no Jason Tatum in there, no SGA, no Giannis or any of those people. Like he's only played in the league for 7 years. He's been the favorite basically 80% of the time. That seems unreal.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and he may win one at some point, but yeah, his career is going to be interesting to see if it plays out with how they do in the playoffs. Because right now, for me, I think personally, it's probably going to be Denver and Oklahoma City, and then maybe the Rockets or another team comes out of nowhere and surprises everyone in the NBA playoffs. But I feel like it really is the Thunder and Nuggets year this year, so I don't know if the Mavericks will be able to fully recreate the magic that they had last season because some of that did kind of feel like a Cinderella run and they got beaten so badly in the finals and they didn't make like too many moves outside of just going out there and getting Clay Thompson. So it'll be how much of an impact is Clay really going to make in the playoffs for them? And the Thunder pushed them the hardest out of any team that they beat to 6 games. Like, that was the toughest series for them that they won.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess time will tell. We'll be talking about the NBA as it gets closer and as everything starts to realign in the NBA. We'll be here to talk about it. Um, but I will say we talked about the conference championship. We talked about Josh Allen, Mahomes, Commanders' Cinderella story, the Eagles and what they've done. We talked about the head coaching hires. We talked about the coach hiring fires as well, the NBA. But there's one more thing that we must discuss before we conclude the show for this week here. That's right. Get your goddamn documents ready because we're here to talk about the best of the best, the pillars of excellence in the Brickyard's top five.
Yeah, and we're here to go over the top 5 coming out and heading into the conference championship as far as this week in the NFL and in sports, and it's mostly NFL topics because the NFL is king here. And at number 5, we have a group of people that not a lot of people would probably ever think of being on this list. I know when you think of these people, you're like, these people jump through tables and they spray condiments on each other. What the hell is happening? But I have the Buffalo Bills fans here because what a massive troll for Mark Andrews. You go out there, you fumble. You give the game away. You literally drop the game. It falls through your hands. And you know what they did? The Buffalo Bills fan base raised $32,000 for Mark Andrews charity. Way to go, Buffalo Bills, to rub it in for a good cause. So, diabetes, not today because Aaron. Mark Andrews literally dropped the 2-point conversion. Buffalo felt inspired. He literally inspired people to go donate to his charity because of how bad he played in that game. So, congratulations to the Buffalo Bills fans for being a class act and not beating each other like the Philadelphia Eagles fans do, where they have vitriol and hate like they did with that fan. Like, Buffalo is a pretty welcoming group for everything I've heard. And, even if you are an opposing fan, they will let you jump through a table. They'll embrace you there. So, you know what? They get a lot of hate on this show. But at number 5, the Buffalo Bills fans. And then at number 4, we have the Philadelphia Eagles head coach Big Dom. Big Dom had to do a lot of searching in the offseason, had to kind of rebuild this team. He had to babysit the guy they say is the head coach in Nick Sirianni, but we all know Dom is the real head coach of this team. They went out there, signed Saquon Barkley, had an incredible offseason, and then he also went out there, found the fan that was being harassed by the Philadelphia Eagles, and then sent her merch and was out there kicking out people. That guy ended up getting fired from his job, all thanks to Big Dom. So, congratulations to him for turning around the Philadelphia Eagles because when he was not there and he wasn't there to calm down Nick Sirianni, the entire team fell apart. So, he's really been the stabilizing factor for this team. And it showed last season that they actually need him on that sideline, and he's a huge um influence in that community of Philadelphia, making a very dark place, Gotham City, some say, a brighter place. So, congratulations, Big Dom and the Philadelphia Eagles. At number three, the Chicago Bears. Congratulations. You didn't fuck it up all the way this time in the offseason. You went out there and you got a guy who turns out is a literal psychopath. You hire Ben Johnson, then he turns around. Amon Ra's on his podcast. He's like, "Yeah, coach, we're gonna beat you." He just turns around, gives him a spunk look. I'm gonna fucking destroy you. It's like, whoa, where did that come from? You see the villain in his eyes, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Yeah, it was nice beating Matt LaFleur twice a year. Like, I hope to continue that." And this guy is talking like he's won a Super Bowl head coach, but what that does is his arrogance is trying to show, like, guys, look what I did with that offense here. Like, I'm gonna turn this organization around, and then at some point it's gonna rub off on the players. Like, yeah, he is gonna turn this organization around. And he's just laying these small seeds in Chicago. It's like, okay, this is a guy who has the swagger to do it. And some people don't like the arrogance, but I feel like the arrogance is needed with the Chicago Bears team because sometimes you do need be a little bit arrogant. Sometimes you do have to show the confidence. Sometimes you do have to slow it. Like, yeah, I know I'm that dude. I know I'm the guy. And like, what are you gonna do about it? And some people are like, yeah, okay. And then that's what it's going to take to turn around the Chicago Bears. So I feel like at number three, Chicago, you did the right thing by hiring Ben Johnson. At number two, I have a man who has since exited the playoffs, but he did the first thing that no other head coach has done since the Philadelphia Eagles, where he got two head coaches off of his staff hired. Yes, Dan Campbell getting a shout out at number two here. You went out there, you got Ben Johnson hired, you got Aaron Glenn hired, which is a tough thing to do, and you officially started your head coaching tree. You just had the best season of any Detroit team in NFL history. You rebuilt one of the worst teams, and now you're sending two of your disciples to coach other teams in the NFL. So at number two, we have Dan Campbell bringing out the best in Ben Johnson and getting him and Aaron Glenn hired. Call Dan Campbell indeed, because he's got your application and he's sending out your resume. And then at number one, it's the Chiefs. Like, obviously, like, this is a team that has the chance to do something that has never been done in history, which is win three Super Bowls in a row, beat a team four straight times in the playoffs, and there's virtually no pressure on them. And the fact that they got to this point, had the best record in the NFL, I think is frankly ridiculous with the Kansas City Chiefs. And with Patrick Mahomes, it's like you see that play he makes in the divisional round where he's falling over, throws the touchdown out of a sack versus Houston, and then absolutely went out there and dominated the fourth quarter and then started running the ball, which is what he remembers to do when he gets to the playoffs because he's usually just conserving his body. I think at number one, it's the Kansas City Chiefs because they've been the most, I don't know, dominant team in NFL history, but sometimes having the best record in the NFL, the one seed, the best quarterback, the best coach is not enough for teams to pick you. It's like, no, people are so excited for something else that it's an unfortunate situation where I feel like people are really taking for granted what they're seeing right now. They're like, I hate the Chiefs. It's like, yeah, but you're also witnessing history. You're witnessing the best team of all time. I don't hate the Kansas City Chiefs. Some people are like, oh, the refs, like, oh, your team not making a play when it matters. How about you actually show up and win the game instead of crying about the refs? Like, the refs aren't going to dictate the outcome of every single game. And, the Chiefs refuse to go out there and be absolutely dominated. They've only been dominated once in the playoffs, and that was the Super Bowl versus the GOAT in Tom Brady. And you had an elite defense on that team, and it was the COVID year, and their entire offensive line was hurt in that game. It's like your right tackle and your left tackle was hurt. That's the only time they've been dominated in the playoffs. Who else in the playoffs can say that? Outside of the Commanders, but it's a new thing. It's like every other team has been dominated. So at number one, it's not even just it's the Chiefs, it's obviously the Chiefs.
Obviously, it's the Chiefs, and that's why they have to be at number one. They've basically been stapled to number one the last decade at this point. We could confidently say pretty much since the Patriots era has ended. So at number one, we have the of the top five teams, the Chiefs at the highest spot. We even got a shout out from the Bills as well. We got a shout out for Dan Campbell as well. But the pillars of excellence will be redefined on Sunday for the Commanders, for the Eagles, for the Bills, for the Chiefs, and legacies will be determined. So you're going to want to make sure you check out next week's episode as we recap the conference championship and we preview the big game. It's big. It's, dare I say, super. That's right. We're going to be talking about the Super Bowl, the last game of the year. Both a bitter swan song and also a commemorative final game. We'll be able to recover that as well. You're not going to want to miss it next week as we go over that. Most importantly, though, as we talk about legacies, as we talk about the greatness of the NFL, message of all that we stay true to:
Stay
stay
brick.
brick. Beautiful.
Electric. I may go to a Bills bar